Welcome to the Peer Review Podcast, Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. I'm Mira Sukharov. Together with my colleague Sarah Bunin-Benor, in each episode we bring you into conversation with fellow scholars and other experts on living a good academic life. Today we'll be tapping into the wisdom of Annmarie Caño, a professor of psychology at Gonzaga University and a two-time fellow of the American Psychological Association. She has held leadership positions at public and private universities and is the author of Leading Toward Liberation: How to Build Cultures of Thriving in Higher Education. And that's with Johns Hopkins University Press. Annmarie, it's a delight to be with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mira. Very excited to have this conversation with you today.
Oh, good. So let's unpack a lot of these words that you're using that are really key, I think, to really getting to the heart of your vision, your philosophy, what you're inviting us to grab onto in our roles in universities. So liberation. What is
Yes.
liberation to you? What is liberation psychology? What is liberatory leadership? Tell us a bit about that.
Ooh, okay. So liberation is all about freedom, but it's not a selfish sort of freedom. It's freedom in service of other people and freedom so that everyone can fully thrive. And a little bit of what you're trying to achieve with your podcast. So how do we create cultures in which people can have a good life, contribute to something greater than themselves? So to be able to do that, that means that we have a liberation mindset when we look at our workspaces and the institutions within which we work, read the reality of what is happening, what has happened in the past, how our institutions came to be in the first place, but also what is the socio-political context currently in contemporary times that might be both enhancing our ability to be more free at work, but also might be hindering that. And then how do we take a systemic look, really centering the people who are on the ground and sometimes the most vulnerable uh, communities and individuals that we serve and who also work at our institutions so that we can make systemic changes in which everyone can thrive, not just the people who hold power or authority in a way that hoards that privilege just for themselves.
Mhm.
So, liberatory leadership means really trying to cultivate that practice of seeing the way things are and have been, and also envisioning an un otro mundo posible, so an other possible world than the one that currently exists,
Mhm.
so that we have that sense of freedom and thriving.
Hmm. Great. I want to pick up on the Spanish that you used and ask a little bit about the Latin American traditions
Mhm.
that you're drawing on in the book. But first,
Yeah.
I was struck by when you said that right away at the beginning of the answer that you're giving, that it's that liberation isn't to be viewed in a isolated way, that it's about the betterment of the individual, him or herself or themselves. And
Mhm.
I think when we often hear the word liberty, it
Yeah.
does have those kinds of connotations of
Mhm.
hypercapitalism and may the
Yes.
best person win. Although now I
Mhm.
really realize I am stepping into tricky ground, because if we are thinking about meritocracy and we want to elevate the best people, or so tell us a bit about that. Is this about
Yeah.
evening the playing field? Is this about, so how does that and okay, so let me there's two
Yeah.
sort of questions there. Is this about evening the playing field so everyone can thrive, or in addition, is it also about living your best life? So where is the self in
Mhm.
all this?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna um I'm gonna go back a little bit to the other question about the Latin American roots to this because I think that'll
Sure.
help me answer this bigger question.
Excellent.
Um, so there are many strains or strands of liberation praxis practiced throughout the world, and thought that's deeply grounded in like local contexts and what is happening. The Latin American strand of liberation praxis has its roots in education, sociology, and theology during that post-Cold War time where Latin America, broadly speaking, and I'm making a big generalization because there's so many different countries and cultures and languages and peoples all in this very large region. But we're struggling with like, how do we as a people and as countries um, come into this new world and have agency over our destiny when all these other superpowers are trying to influence how we govern ourselves, how we spend our money, what currency we use, all these kinds of things. And really, the theologians during the 1960s uh, met together. So there was a bishops' conference in the Catholic Church in the 60s in Medellin, where they really articulated like, we need to meet the needs of the people. We are here for the people. The powers that be are not putting the people's best interests in their decision making, but we can do that. And here's how we're gonna walk with the people. We're gonna enter into their uh, experiences, their struggles. We're going to be listening more deeply to what is happening because the reality is that the people who are most affected, most vulnerable, most marginalized are the ones who know what the solutions are to bring them into a better state, and not just financially, but like to flourish and to be more fully alive and more fully human. So then when we talk about meritocracy today, sometimes, and as a younger person, and I'm a first generation college student, I was valedictorian of my high school, I went to an Ivy League school. This idea of meritocracy was very appealing to me, and also daughter of an immigrant. It's like, if I work hard enough, then I can do anything that is open to me. Like, there's no limit.
Mm-hmm.
And that meritocratic belief that if you work hard enough, you can achieve anything, it kept me engaged and it kept me chasing after certain things. And I collected credentials, like many of us have. But as I experienced more things and also obstacles that didn't make sense to me, I realized, oh, I'm allowed to participate in the meritocracy that we have. But it isn't truly a meritocracy because there's a whole bunch of people with skills who are being left out, or people who are never allowed to develop skills that they have the potential to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And then whole swaths of people who are not, maybe they do have the solutions for how to better their communities or improve mental health or improve food sovereignty or do anything like this, but no one's listening to them because the powers that be are not allowing that knowledge, the skill, the experience to get the credit it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
So liberation praxis, then, like, I probably wouldn't say it's like about let's give everyone a fair shake. It's more fundamental and like rooted in what does it mean to really listen into the whole community, the creative solutions that everybody has, so that collectively we can all do better and we can all experience a life that's more fully human.
Mm-hmm. So really about the toggling between individual fulfillment and the structures that contain us individually and trying to amplify additional voices as a leader.
Well,
Okay.
and the individual fulfillment comes from the collective fulfillment. I think there's a more strong linking there from a liberation standpoint that no one can be individually fulfilled fully. Like it can't be achieved if there isn't collective liberation and collective fulfillment.
Hmm. So before we move on to the some of the specific suggestions that you lay out in your book, it
Mhm.
might be helpful to think about the discipline you came from, which is psychology, which is, of
Yes.
course, very individually rooted, as opposed to sociology, which is
Mhm.
about studying groups as the unit of analysis. But your psychology isn't ordinary psychology, it's liberation psychology. So, as I understand it, it's about bringing structures of oppression and societal forces into the analysis, into your I don't know about your clinical analysis, but just tell us a little bit about that for those who might be interested in understanding a bit more about how
Yeah.
psychology can transcend an overly narrow look at the
Sure.
individual in isolation.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah. I love this question, because I was not raised as a liberation psychologist.
mhm,
And so the kind of psychology that I learned was very individual. I ended up working with couples, so that expands it a little bit. Like, how do people interact with each other?
right.
Um, so even in my own discipline, liberation psychology feels newer, at least in North America.
Mhm,
Um, And it is very much about the person is nested within this larger context. So you have the individual, you have relationships, you have your community, your neighborhood, workplace, city, country, and world. So we have to always consider whatever someone is experiencing, thoughts, feelings, emotions, challenges. It's not just my own thoughts and thinking. It's not just my biology, it's not just my personality or how I was raised, but the socio-political context and my history of all the peoples before me brought me to this moment. So, clinically speaking, that would mean if I had a client come in, I'm not just going to ask, how are you feeling and thinking, but tell me about your family, tell me about your community. And I will try to understand how the political in the world is having an impact on this person to the extent that they're aware of that.
mhm,
It also means that the psychologist is not just working in the therapy room, but
mhm,
they're also advocating out in the world for changes that can bring about broader health for everybody.
mhm,
And that might mean becoming an activist in a particular way they might feel comfortable for, engaging with political structures, voting, um, protesting as may need to happen. But all of those activities are part of the psychologist's role when we think about liberation, like that particular liberation strand of psychology.
mhm. Makes a lot of sense. And there's, of course, always some internal fights in your scholarly association, so far as I
Mhm.
follow it a little bit, about which issues should be foregrounded and
Yes.
what is the just approach to a particular issue. And this is where my work comes in because I specialize in Israel Palestine. Let me ask you a little bit about how you suggest people start on this path. And I think one thing that's very important to note in your book is that you talk about leaders, but by leader, you don't only mean someone who has a senior administrative position.
Right.
Anybody can, or maybe even should, aspire to be a leader no matter where they are on the corporate or the university administrative ladder. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Agreed. Agreed. Even if you don't have a title, you have influence
Hmm.
and you have authority. Maybe it's in your discipline, it's in the classroom. Like, you have something that needs to be said, and your leadership can be exercised even without a title, without budget, without people who report to you.
Excellent. Okay, so one of the first things you encourage readers to do is to think about their personal mission statement. Tell us a little more about this and tell us how we would go about doing this individually. And it connects very much to values.
Yes.
And I know many of us talk about values, and Sarah and I try to talk about that on our podcast. I think I can identify my values pretty easily, but one thing I have trouble settling on sometimes is identifying my preferences.
Mm.
So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
in any event, whether we talk about preferences or simply values, how to start accessing that. How do we even know who
Mhm.
we are?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. I think doing that values clarification work is foundational part of liberatory leadership, because if you don't know who you are, how are you supposed to respond to the things that are going on in the world? And also, how are you supposed to gauge, like, let's say something makes you feel uncomfortable. And you mentioned the Israel-Palestine conflict. Um, Sometimes we feel uncomfortable and then we just disengage from a conversation, or we don't interrogate, well, what's making me feel uncomfortable about this? And so we lose an opportunity to go into like, well, what values are being values buttons are being triggered when I hear someone talk about something this way, or when someone criticizes me in a particular way, and I just turn off, or I disengage, or I lash out. That also happens with leadership.
Mhm.
So I, in my own life, having a sense of those values and being able to write it down into a statement has helped me figure out what to say yes and no to when I get asked to participate in something like a podcast, or a committee, or being tapped for a leadership position. Like, everything sounds interesting to academics because we're learners. We want to learn everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes, also in my coaching practice, I'll have clients who they're excellent at so many things, so they get asked to do a lot of things, and then they say yes to everything, and they veer toward burnout.
Mhm.
So getting clear on your values helps you more easily figure out what to say yes and no to, or how you want to respond to something, or what happens, how to behave or how to act when you're challenged.
Mhm.
And there are many ways to get to tap into that. One way, I like to journal.
Mhm.
Since I was a kid, I think that has helped me sense patterns or themes, or things that excite me, things that deplete me. That's
Mhm.
one way to get closer to, like, oh, I value this activity, or I value this cause, or whatever it might be. I offer an exercise in the book that helps you think about the future. And many spiritual traditions use a similar type of exercise to kind of figure out what kind of person you want to be.
Mhm.
In some spiritual exercises, it would be something like, imagine you're on your deathbed
Mhm.
and you look back on your life. What are you especially proud of?
Mhm.
That's one way to do it. Sometimes when I work with people, it's like, if you've had a death in the family recently, or there's other feelings about death, that might not be a way to go. So what I offer is, think about your retirement.
Mhm.
So you're going to go retire, you're going to have a party, you get to invite whoever you want to that party. What do you want people to say about your leadership, or how you showed up as a human being?
Mhm.
And the key is not what would they say about you right now, but what would they say about you?
Mhm.
Like, what do you want them to say about you, in the future, whether it's 10, 15, 20 years from now? And in reflecting on that, you'll often start to tap into your values in a more creative way than if you just try to say, what are my values, and list the words. Um,
Mhm.
because
I
you're
mean,
engaging your imagination.
right. Because there's also values as an empirical statement. What do I care about now versus what do I think I should care about, or what do
Right.
I want to care about?
Right.
Because, and we can think about even material things versus non-material things. I probably do care about material wealth,
Mhm.
or I don't know, we're academics, how much is wealth really a part of it, but material honoraria, let's just say.
Security, or security, like, I value what the wealth brings me.
Yeah, true, but
Mhm.
that puts it
Mhm.
even in more positive terms. But what if I value that extra $1,000 of an
Mhm.
honorarium so that I can uh, have a couple of nights and extra nights in a hotel on a trip that I'm taking?
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily want to value that. So the idea of what do we value versus what do we want to value. But I think that fast forward thinking about how do we want to be remembered is a way to maybe get transcend that a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm.
And when I do workshops and we work through that and I have people talk to each other, this is what comes up. It's like, oh, why am I spending my time on this when really I want to be remembered as this kind of person, or somebody who really valued their relationships and really took time to show care for people or to be curious, or um, so we end up learning like, oh, these are the things I value, but I am spending my time doing these other things.
Mhm.
And drawing from, if you do yoga or mindfulness meditation, or in the psychology, it would be acceptance and commitment therapy, we try really hard to also take the observer standpoint and not judge ourselves too harshly, because we are in an environment that does value that extra night in the hotel or the spa day or the extra money. Like, it makes sense that we're doing that, and we have an opportunity to choose differently or to choose something that is more in line with our values. So from that exercise, it might be like, oh, what I really value are like, I value relationships. I value spending time in nature and cultivating growth in living things, or whatever it might be for people. I value new ideas and creating new knowledge or creating art or whatever it might be. We take those words and distill them and plug them into a personal mission statement
Mhm.
as a reminder to ourselves, because like when the semester is in full force and there's grading, there's students, there's committees, and then all the surprises that come up, and it's it's so easy to get distracted, where we fall into an autopilot, or we fall onto other, like we start holding on to other people's values that they might be trying to impose on to us. Having that mission statement helps you stay strong, to have the fortitude, but also reminds us, like, oh, right, this is what I'm about. So I'm going to say no to this committee if I'm able to, because it's not aligned with this mission that I have. It's probably aligned with somebody else's mission. They can do that, but that's not my work to do. And it just creates a baseline so that you're spending the time on the things that make sense for you. Um, and if you tie it into liberation, then it's also, how am I spending my time in a way that aligns with my values, but also the collective freedom that I'm also trying to seed in the wider world.
So what would a mission statement look like? Is it a couple of
Mhm.
sentences? Is it a
Mhm.
whole long paragraph?
It's a sentence or two, and it could be as easy as I I do X because Y. I
Okay.
mean, real simple.
Mhm.
And you can throw in as many adjectives and verbs that are like value laden as you can. So I give an example of a mission statement that I used in one of my prior roles. Empowering other people was really important to me, and helping people embrace the gifts that they bring to the work was also important to me. Like, I want people to see um, and acknowledge and really own their unique gifts that they bring. So those words were in my personal statement. I empower faculty and staff to do this, this, and this because of this, this, and this. So and it can change over time too. And it's not dependent on a title, because you can live your values out no matter what your role is. If you're on sabbatical, if you're on a leave, it doesn't matter. Those values are stable. It's the activities that come out of those values that might change.
It is
Yeah.
summer. And
Hmm.
many academics choose not to teach in the summer or
Hmm.
normally don't teach in the summer unless they want extra courses or extra income. So one thing about the academic summer I find is it's a tortured time for many of us because we have this open time and we're supposed to be productive and we're supposed to be recharging and we're supposed to do all these different kinds of things that are in some ways at odds with each other. How do you navigate your academic summer, assuming you have one? I
Hmm.
guess if you're in a high admin position, you have a shorter, perhaps, academic summer than when you're a regular faculty member. But how do you
Yeah.
navigate big stretches of open time?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I've used different strategies. I think tying this back into values is like, what am I trying to achieve? And so, as an academic, there might be like this big idea, like, I'm trying to seed liberation across different universities. But also, I have projects within that greater vision of like, I want to write this article, I want to be able to give a talk, you know, these sorts of things. And so I take to mapping out like, what do I want to achieve? And then what are the activities that are going to get me to that a- achievement? What's going to help me live that value that I'm trying to bring to the world? And then I look at my calendar and say, well, what's real, what's realistic? And when I think about my life, it's not just about this project or this goal. I also want to be happy, but not in a surface level happiness, but content and whole, which means I need to have space to be in my garden trying to cultivate vegetables for the first time. That's what my summer project was. Let me try a raised bed where I'm going to grow vegetables. Um, and I want to tend to my flowers and I want to go for walks and I want to spend time with my family and really making sure that I protect that time first, because that's the first time to go when I'm thinking about these other projects I want to do, because the academic work can just expand endlessly. Um, because we're trained to be thinkers and to be like to create things and to always think about the next thing. Like that's a wonderful part of academic life, but it can also spread its tentacles into the other areas of life that we're also trying to cultivate. So really, part of it is the values piece, part of it is what are the projects, but then part of it is protecting time and getting really into my calendar. Like if you saw my calendar, I block it out intentionally to be able to make sure that by the end of the summer or by the end of a leave, that I don't reach the end and say, what did I do with my time?
So, and even saying that the gardening and the spending time with friends or family, that those are also things that are going to go on your list of what I did. You might not
Yes.
submit that list to your dean because the dean
Right.
sometimes, but are you currently a dean? Remind me. Are you
No,
at this
I
moment
was
a
a
dean?
dean.
You
No.
have been a dean. So,
Hmm.
so you understand, so you have received, so you have received these reports
Yes.
from your faculty members, and they don't include I gardened and I spent time with my family, but it sounds like you're the kind of leader that wants to know that they did that as well, wants to know that they had some
Yes.
rejuvenation time.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I wrote an essay for Inside Higher Ed a couple years ago on liberating the sabbatical because I was seeing people write their sabbatical applications in a way that was this endless, like a laundry list of all the things I'm going to get done. And I would look at it and say, first of all, even if you worked 80 hours a week, I don't know how you're going to get all these things done. It felt like they were feeling like they had to prove that they were going to use their sabbatical wisely.
Right.
And we were just coming out of a pandemic too. So I currently work at a predominantly teaching institution. And so, as a dean, I was like, well, I want people to come back and be the best teacher for these students because they had the time to think, write, create, exhibit their work. And if you do all this, I think you're going to come back all burnt out and spent. So, what would it mean to change the way we ask people to request sabbaticals and also change the way we do the reporting so that we're not encouraging this kind of
Mm.
production mentality, which is very much rooted in a capitalistic system? Like, it makes sense how it got to be the way it is, but it doesn't have to be that way because really we want people to be refreshed so that they can do their scholarship teaching, whatever their role is. Um, and that's the way I approached it as a dean, was looking at these and telling people, like, if you have one project that you need this time to get done, that's great.
Mm.
Um, if you tell me all you're doing is gardening, I'm going to come back and say, but how is this, like, what else are you doing? How is this connected to your academic work? Because I do need to make a justification for how these funds are being spent. But I know it's not like that at many places. And that's why I wrote that article, was like, we need to really rethink systemically. And this would be an example of applying liberation leadership or liberation praxis to a system. We can tell individuals, or there could be an individual dean who uses this practice, but until we change how we approve sabbaticals or what information we're requesting on the sabbatical application, we're never going to see the systemic change. We're just going to see one-off solutions, but that doesn't actually change the bigger system.
So your prescription or suggestion would be to have people fill out the form um, with more realistic goals in mind so that they don't come back burned out and that they don't feel they have to prove that they're a super scholar or have
Yeah.
superhuman abilities and superhuman efficiencies. But they still
Hmm.
don't have to tell you about their gardening, etc. You just want to
No.
know that they're going to come back both having produced and feeling fulfilled and rested somewhat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you said we can each make changes individually and it's hard to do those systematically, I guess that's where our scholarly associations come into play.
Yeah.
But we know what a scholarly conference is, and it's very, very much focused on research. And it's not
Hmm.
often, there isn't a lot of space at our scholarly conferences to talk about administrative practices.
Right.
But that's
Right.
where we have the outlets, like Inside Higher Education, that's where you published it, and
Yes.
Chronicle of Higher Education. And so
Yeah.
it's good to get those ideas out.
Yeah. And I think those networks, so the disciplinary networks, and then there's also all these leadership associations, depending on what your role is in higher ed. That's another place where people can share ideas for doing things differently. There will always be the financial tension with changes in practice and sometimes fear of, well, if we change something, like if we change the sabbatical process, more people might ask for sabbaticals and we're going to have to actually decline some, and we feel uncomfortable with that. But then it's like, well, that's an opportunity to grow in your leadership then. And that, that's not going away, this tension between, like, we need to maintain a financial viability. Like, these institutions need to function, and also we're trying to do things differently. But if you only just say, well, we've never done it that way, or I'm afraid of what will happen if we do it that way, and you don't actually investigate the idea or consider it, then all you're going to do is squash the creativity of your leaders, where everyone just becomes automatons and not bringing creative solutions to the table that could make the whole system better.
So on that note, with the liberatory leadership framework that you're espousing and that you adhere to, is it usually in tension with the bottom line, or are there areas where this kind of approach, a liberatory approach, can be cost saving? And I'm sorry to ask the
Mhm.
question so bluntly, but
Yeah.
this is what administrators understandably have to be worried about.
Yep. Yep. So I can give you an example of a situation where it was cost neutral.
Okay.
So it was a time when I was in a different leadership position than dean, but I was in charge of a graduate fellowship that we had, that we would give out to people across the university. And it was not keeping pace with inflation. So, and the cost of living, the increasing cost of living of the city that we lived in. And so students were saying, this is not covering us anymore. Like, we have to start working because of the stipend. The only solution that I could think of was make fewer stipends and make them bigger, but that means fewer students are going to get assistance,
Mhm.
or keep it the way it is. And I was like, there's got to be more solutions than this. But I don't know what they are. I only have one vantage point, one viewpoint of what could happen. So I gathered all the graduate directors across disciplines, STEM, humanities, arts, and asked them, like, here's my dilemma. I'm hearing from students that this stipend doesn't cover things. I can't add money. There's no magic money for me to increase the pool of funds for this fellowship. What do you think we should do? And the liberatory part was that I didn't, as the leader, just decide and make it so.
Mhm.
I asked other people, what do you think? You are closer to the students and you all represent different disciplines with different needs. Some of you have part-time students, some of you have full-time students, some of you have parent students. You have the knowledge. What do you think is going on? How should we do this together? And I presented my two solutions and said, these are not the only two, but this is like, I know that there's got to be something else. This is the Otro Mundo es Posible. There's another possible world, but I don't know if I completely see what it could be. Let's cut the stipend in half to distribute to more students,
Mhm.
and then try to put them in touch with other forms of funding to make up the gap. So that was something I hadn't thought of. And then there are a few other solutions. And what we ended up doing was, it feels like we didn't make any change because we kept the number of fellowships
Mhm.
with that current level of funding. But there is a whole nother selection of fellowships and scholarships that were available that these students couldn't touch. And we said, okay, let's create another opportunity so that students are not overly restricted by this particular fellowship,
Mhm.
which then allowed certain students in certain disciplines to tap into money to make up the difference. But then there were other students who didn't need the extra money.
Mhm.
And then within each department, those departments also took it upon themselves to create opportunities for their students now that they understood the whole picture, because they didn't understand why we couldn't just expand the scholarship offerings. So that's an example of, we didn't we didn't increase, we didn't have to find more money from other pots or take it away from other people. But the solutions that I had for a financial pickle um, was not restricted by my own imagination. So we
Excellent.
relied on the whole. And then it helped everybody, also recognizing that there's differences.
Thanks for that example. Yeah, that's powerful. Tell us a bit about accompaniment. That's a big part
Mhm.
of the book, a big theme, and you
Yes.
use the Spanish
Yeah.
word, which you'll have to remind me.
Acompañamiento.
Mhm.
So acompañamiento, it captures more of what accompaniment is, but I also like accompaniment,
Okay.
which is um, entering into the struggle with the people that you lead, or the people around you who have less power or less authority, or perhaps they're excluded or marginalized in different ways. And that is definitely a Latin American liberation practice. And liberation psychologists often talk about acompañamiento as a way to really be with people in a different way. So it's not a theoretical solidarity, which is a little bit easier to do. Like, oh, I empathize with, so for faculty, I empathize with staff because they don't often have tenure. They're in a more precarious job situation. So we can kind of understand that intellectually. Acompañamiento means that when we make decisions, we consider how it might be affecting those who are more precarious or have less authority or power. And on a college campus, there's often these divisions between faculty and staff at many different kinds of institutional types. Sometimes faculty advocate for things and are not aware of how it might adversely affect staff.
Mhm.
And maybe it's issues having to do with pay, like the cost of living increases for many universities are not keeping up with, or there are no cost of living increases, not keeping up with the cost of living. And if faculty advocate for that, let's say in a faculty union, but they're not also consulting with the staff union or how this might impact staff, it's like they amass the additional privilege of the raises, whereas the staff are left
Mhm.
still disempowered. So that would be like a concrete example of like what would it mean for faculty to accompany staff? It would be to bring them in and say, well, we want to advocate for you too. Let's all advocate together. Yeah. So accompaniment is about the practice of accompaniment and not just accompanying people like us. So for faculty, be faculty, for white faculty, be white faculty, but really trying to read the reality of your institution to see like who is being left out of the conversations and how do we bring them into it so that it's not just me who's enjoying the privileges.
Mhm. So one of the things that you raise in the book regarding being left out of the conversation is the idea that's increasingly called the hidden curriculum. So what are some examples of the hidden curriculum that you as a leader can help those who are left out access?
Yeah. Yep. If we think about promotion and tenure, there's definitely a hidden curriculum at most institutions about how much productivity is necessary. Some institutions, they say like two publications or this many publications, but at many, it's left open.
Mhm.
And part of the reasoning is, well, we want to weigh quality and quantity. Um, we know it when we see it. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, there's a hidden curriculum about what it means to be successful. There's also a hidden curriculum around hiring and how we recruit new faculty and staff into our departments. I see this when a job application will say something like, include a teaching statement and a research statement, but no other instructions.
Mhm.
People who have wonderful mentors know what goes into those documents and how to really sell yourself in a good way, how to pitch your unique talents and skills. But if you haven't had the privilege of having a great mentor or being networked up in a way where you have people spontaneously sharing materials with you, you're taking a guess. And then when you submit your materials, you're being judged on something that no one told you about before. So those two, the hiring and then the promotion and tenure process, to me, both have it rife with the hidden curriculum uh, having
And
an
I do
impact.
recall the year that our dean's office asked each department to formalize the tenure and promotion standards
Yeah.
at the department level for a start. And I think that
Mhm.
was so important because the transparency is, and I, just before you said, I know it when we see it, I was just thinking that same line, and it does favor those who will naturally rise to the top, but it's the people in the middle that where the case could go either way, that it could hurt. It's
Yeah.
now remind me of students who, when sometimes I say, hand in a few paragraphs about the readings each week to
Hmm.
show me that you've done the readings. And they'll say, how many words,
Yes.
how many readings? And I'll say, oh, just show me that you've done the readings, But now I understand, I've sort of learned to be more empathetic to those who have less confidence, and
Hmm.
those kinds of vague instructions are good for those who already get it. But we're trying to also
Yes.
shepherd people along.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you're a leader who's in charge of any of those processes, whether it's at the department level or maybe you're a committee member, that's where you can infuse this, like just by asking questions like, how will we know when we see it? When we say that we want an excellent scholar, what does that mean? because that might mean different things to people. And it can create conflict in departments because people may have wildly different ideas of what success looks like or what a great hire would be. But those are needed conversations. And this is where knowing yourself is so important. If you're, let's say, a department chair or a committee head, being able to navigate those conversations and shepherd people through that conversation is important, because it will bring up tension and stress. And if as a leader you're not aware of that, you may be more likely to just jump in and tell people what to do. I went into academia because I was like, wow, I get to decide a lot of how I spend my time and what I get to think about. That is awesome. And I know that there are a lot of people like me. So for a leader to come in and say, we're going to do it this way, doesn't resonate with people. But if you can develop that more listening stance that's required for acompañamiento, then you can hear the themes and the fears that come up with, well, this feels different. It's scary for me to be able to put down on paper what I think a successful scholar is. You can navigate those conversations, listen to what people are really saying, and help shepherd everybody through this time of change. But that's where liberation requires that you have a strong sense of self so that you can accompany others.
So it's the strong sense of self, the accompaniment, and the listening is really key. And so it's really toggling back and forth between, I was going to say between leading and listening, but of course I'm misspeaking there. It's that listening is a very crucial part of leading. I'm looking at the title of your book. I'm looking, for those who are watching this on YouTube, but it's a bird who's perched outside of its cage, but it hasn't totally flown away. So it doesn't necessarily mind its home as long as it has the option of maybe going to and fro. Is that the idea there?
Maybe. So I conveyed the idea to the publisher. They came up with this design, which I think is fantastic. The way I interpret it is the bird has left the confines, the rigid confines of the cage. They're perched and they're looking away from the door to the cage. So they're looking at what could be. They're free, but they're not throwing everything in the garbage. Right, they're not completely dismantling everything, but they're kind of looking at what else could be. So to me, there's a sense of potential and an opening, literally, to a different way of doing things.
And on that note, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights, your time, your experiences, your memories, your aspirations, and I think our work lives will be better for it. Thank you so much, Annmarie.
Thank you, Mira.
The Peer Review podcast is produced and hosted by Sarah Bunin-Benor and Mira Sukharov. Talia Ehrenberg is assistant producer and editor. The music is written and performed by the Galactic Ambassadors. Support for this podcast comes from a faculty grant from Hebrew Union College. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can reach us at peerreview@huc.edu. You can join the conversation on Facebook at Peer Review, Cultivating Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. Thank you for listening.